Yeah, so wrestling for me has always been about family. I got into it through my family, and my family's always been actively involved in wrestling. So my dad wrestled at Binghamton University in the 70s. He was a national finalist, and he actually has been inducted into their Hall of Fame. So my dad is a Hall of Fame wrestler at Binghamton, and when I was a little kid, I remember going to his induction ceremony. So this is a pretty cool event for me because of one of those memories. And just the other day, as I was trying to explain what the Hall of Fame was to my son Luke, who's 3, he said, "Well, Daddy, I'm going to be in the Hall of Fame one day, so I can get lots of lollipops." And I'm not sure where the lollipops came in, but I thought that was cool. My dad's in the Hall of Fame. I'm getting in the Hall of Fame here. And I think it was funny listening to a 3-year-old try to figure out what the Hall of Fame was. And then we got a message from daycare that said he keeps pinning his friends in gym class. So he's on his way already, And so other than my dad, my brother Jason wrestled at American University before I did. So if Jason hadn't come here, it's probably unlikely I would have. So he and I grew up wrestling together. We were 1 year apart. We were always training partners. And when he came here, I got to spend time with the team, visiting my brother, and just really liked the coaching staff and the team at the time. So I kind of followed Jason here, and then my younger brother Corey followed both of us here. So wrestling's always been about family, and it still is about family for me to this day. So when I was in high school, I didn't get recruited to a lot of places. I had a good high school career, but it wasn't really until my senior year that I, got to that next level. So as a sophomore, I was 3rd in the state of New York. As a junior, I was 5th. So I wasn't on a ton of recruiting radars. I had never placed in a national level event, and my brother Jason was coming to school here. So early on in the recruiting process, I was getting recruited by American, I was getting recruited by Binghamton, and a little bit by Sacred Heart and Bucknell, but not a ton of big schools, not a ton of prominent wrestling programs. And my brother being here was one of the driving influences. Coach Cody at the time had been talking with me a lot about coming and about the program he had been building. Coach Papalizio was the assistant at the time who recruited me, and then he took the head coaching job at Binghamton, where I am now, before I got to American. So that was kind of a cool recruiting process. And then the last guy that was probably a big part of that was Evan Murtaugh. And not a ton of people know this story, but I had gone to a wrestling camp the summer before. So I guess it was summer after my junior year. And Evan was there as a camp counselor, and we were doing matches, and they weren't supposed to be coached or anything like that. And I was wrestling this kid from Albany, and his coach started coaching him. And so Evan jumped in the corner and started coaching me, and that was really my first, I got to know Evan. And then during the recruiting process, I got a phone call in, it was probably late October, early November, when I was really trying to figure out where I wanted to go to school. And I answered the phone, and this coach jumps on the phone. He says, "Hey, I'm a coach at Southeastern University." It's a made-up school, all right? So I'm a coach at Southeastern University. We've watched you wrestle. We want to offer you a full scholarship to come wrestle for us, right? And I'm on the phone. I'm like, where is it? What? Can you tell me anything about it? He's like, "No, but you have 10 seconds to decide if you want a full scholarship or not," right? And he starts counting down, 10, 9, 8. And I'm on the phone, right? I'm 17. I don't know what to say to this guy, right? And then I hear laughing, and it was Evan on the phone, and my brother Jason was in the car with him, right? So it was just a prank phone call. And that was one of the things, right, during my recruiting process. There's not many specific stories I remember, and that's one of them, where it was just Evan pretending to be a coach, and the countdown, 10, 9, 8, you've got to decide or you're going to lose the scholarship, right? So he was definitely a part of why I ended up here as well. So Mark Cody was among the biggest reasons I ended up wrestling here at American University, and he was a perfect coach for me at that time in my life. I grew up in, I think, a pretty structured environment in my household, and there would be certain things where maybe I'd get wound tight with certain issues and things like that. And coming to American, Coach Cody kind of beat that out of me a little bit, you know. And when I look back on why Coach Cody was so important for me, it's because he allowed me to be comfortable when things didn't happen the right way, you know. And meet at school, we're gonna leave at 11. It's like noon, and I'm like, where are we leaving? What's going on, right? And like, he'd show up at 12:30, right? Things like that, little things where, looking back on it, I'm pretty sure he did this stuff on purpose to make us uncomfortable and allow us to realize, like, these little things don't matter. And I think when you're in a wrestling match, in a big moment, if you allow little problems to stop you from competing at the level you can compete at, if you allow outside influences to distract you, that can be the difference between placing at the NCAAs or even qualifying for the NCAAs or not. And I think a lot of Coach Cody's influence on me was allowing me to become comfortable without knowing exactly what was going to be happening. And I think that that's life, and I think that's wrestling, right? When you expect something to happen a certain way and it doesn't, you can get flustered and upset and make mistakes, or you can just realize that you've got to change course and figure out what to do now that the plan has changed a little bit. And when I look back on my time at AU wrestling for Coach Cody, I think that was kind of what he taught me, was it's okay for not everything to be perfect. It's okay to make mistakes and adjust and fix them. And a lot of that was just, he taught it to me through things that he did, and I'm pretty sure they were purposeful. I'm gonna give him that credit at this point. Yeah, Joe Henson was the assistant coach for 3 of my 4 years at American, and then he and I coached together the year that the team finished 5th in the country. And I think that Joe is often underappreciated by a lot of the people and overshadowed, because Mark Cody was the head coach and I spent time as an assistant coach. And I think sometimes the assistant coaches are doing a lot of work behind the scenes that people don't really see and understand. And I got to know Joe really well as a student athlete and then as a co-worker of his. And I got to see in a different way, like, how much Joe did to make sure the program was successful. And I've stayed in touch with Joe over the years. He's come up to Binghamton. We've gone golfing. He's come to some different events. And I'm just really excited that Joe's going to be the one here to do my introduction for the Hall of Fame event. Being a 2-time All-American, for me, obviously was very special. I'd never placed in a national tournament in high school. So doing it twice at the NCAA Division I championships is a big deal. And, you know, sometimes as a coach, I kind of reflect back on that. You know, how did I do it? What motivated me? What drove me to do it? And I think the answer was pretty simple. I didn't like not being the best, and there were guys on my team that were better than me, you know. So in wrestling, it's a team sport in a way, but it's also an individual sport, right? So the best thing you can do for your team is win as an individual. And I had Josh Glenn as a teammate. Josh won a national championship, right? He was a 3-time All-American. I had Mike Cannon as a teammate. Mike was a year ahead of me, and he was an All-American as a sophomore, and then he did it again as a junior and senior. So for me, it was just about competitiveness. I was in the room, and I wasn't the best guy, and I wanted to be better than Josh and Mike, right? And ultimately, I wasn't better than either of those guys, but having them there motivated me and drove me to be better, right? And then I had guys like Steve Fittery coming in on my heels, right? And now all of a sudden, Mike and Steve are both better than me, right? So it's like, how do I keep up? How do I continue to get better? And just having those guys around, you know, Josh wasn't a training partner of mine. He was 50 pounds bigger than me, but just having him there and knowing he did it, he's training the same way I am. Mike's doing it, he's training the same way I am. There's no reason I can't be an All-American. And if I'm not, it's because I'm creating excuses for myself for reasons not to be one. So I think just the singular drive was to be better than Josh and Mike, right? So, and even though I never was, it drove me to my success that I had. I draw a lot of my coaching from my time as a student athlete, both in things that were good and went well, and things that weren't so good and didn't go as expected. And I think one of the biggest things for me was coming through a program that was extraordinarily successful both athletically and academically. Our team always did well in school and at the NCAA championships. And our team did well in school despite me a lot of times. So I wasn't the greatest student on the team. You'll see my brother Jason's name in the room as an academic All-American. I'm not on that wall. But because of that, it allows me to kind of reflect on that with some of my guys, right? I get disappointed when they don't get as good of grades as I expect them to, but then I have to take a step back and remember, like, well, I didn't do that either, right? And how can I help them now, right? Not just have an expectation for them without providing them support to help them do better. And it's the same thing with wrestling, right? How do I make sure my guys are competing better and not just getting angry and frustrated at when we do lose, right? And that's one of those things where, as a student athlete, I remember back to my freshman year, I had lost 6 straight matches going into the conference tournament. I started my season out really well. I'd lost 6 straight matches, and I went into the conference championships unseeded as a freshman, drew the 1 seed in the first round, and I pinned him and ended up placing in the top 4 to qualify for the NCAA championships, right? But that was coming off of a lot of bad matches, and I try to make sure my guys realize, even if you're losing, every single match you wrestle is independent of any other result you've had this season, right? Last week doesn't matter, next week matters. And that's hard to do in wrestling because it's a personal sport. You step out on the mat, it's one guy, and you win or lose in front of everyone watching, right? So it's hard to get out of your own head sometimes, and I try to just use past examples and experiences to make my guys understand, like, yeah, you might have gotten pinned last week, but you can beat that guy next week. And unless you actually believe that, you'll never have that success. And I draw a lot of that from my time here as a student athlete, but also from watching my teammates here, right? Guys that, I think going back to Josh Glenn, he got pinned at the Midlands Championships by Kurt Backus the year that he won the national championships. And he beat Kurt Backus in the finals to do it. So I think in our sport you can draw those connections a lot, and it comes down to that mentality that every single match you wrestle is independent of any other result you've had that season. So I got a call last year about being inducted into the Hall of Fame here at American. Mike Cannon called me, and he had just been inducted, I think, the previous year. And Mike called, and I hadn't talked to him in a while, and he was like, hey, I just wanted to call you to let you know you're being inducted into the Hall of Fame. And this was right last, like a year and a half ago. And, you know, I was like, well, that's great. I'm really excited. When is it, right? And Mike said, you know, it's like February 20th or something like that. I was like, I'm having a baby on February 12th. Well, my wife is, right? My wife's having a baby on the 12th, and we have a match that weekend, right? So I'd love to be there. And I remember just asking Mike, like, you think they'd let me do it the next year? And he was like, I don't know. So then I think I called Dave Beerworth and we talked about it. And I'm just so happy that the university agreed to allow me to do it this year. And then I got a hold of Coach Borelli right away and said, hey, I'm going to get inducted into the Hall of Fame. Can we do a match that weekend, right? Can we figure it out to make sure that we're coming down that weekend and I'll just stay for the weekend? And he was awesome, right? He's like, yeah, let's do it. We could, get some alums back in town, and that sounds great. So it's been a long time now coming, and I'm glad that everyone from Coach Borelli to the administration at American worked it out and kind of worked around my schedule a little bit, and just really makes me feel like it was important to the school to allow me to do that. And my kids are both going to be here now, and my wife, and I couldn't be more grateful.